anxiety, sitting on trains. Every step I get to, I'm clocking that game. Everyone's a winner, we're making our fame. Bonafide.
Thank you. I know a lot of people are asking the question, how do I become a person of courage like that? My name is Dr. Jeff Myers. I'm the president of Summit Ministries and Summit.org. Every summer I have the opportunity to invite hundreds of young adults to Manitou Springs, Colorado, this little hippie town tucked right in at the foot of Pikes Peak. And in that place, we talk about how a Christian worldview is the source of liberty and prosperity and hope, and how to embrace it and defend it so that you can become leaders. I hope that we'll have the opportunity to study together at some point. Before I did this job, however, I had the opportunity to be a professor and also to start several different businesses to help everybody from nonprofit organizations to corporations improve their ability to communicate and to lead well. I've had the opportunity to train 1 million people now in how to communicate the truth without fear, and that's what I want to talk about in about 15 minutes or so that we have today. Do you want to be the kind of person who can, even in your classes, communicate the truth without fear? There are two things you'll need to understand, but I'm going to get ready to go really fast here. Most people from Colorado speak at about 80 words a minute. I speak at about 150 with gusts up to 220 when I get excited about something. So I want you to text the word notes to 33233 to get all of the notes from this session, as well as all of the notes from the 2 workshops that I will tell you about that I'll be doing this afternoon in just a moment. Be sure you put the word notes in there, otherwise you will get a coupon from a beauty salon in New Jersey. Unless you want that, but just text the word notes, 33233. Got it? All right, I'm going to begin with a story that helps me understand the ground that we're dealing with. Several years ago, I had the opportunity to travel and speak in the city of New York. The condition was that I would have to rent a car and drive myself from location to location. This really made me nervous because I lived in a small town in Tennessee at the time. No one in my town would ever dream of blaring their horn at somebody else. In New York City, the horn is the most important part of the steering wheel. In my town, there's one highway. It's really easy to figure out where to go. In New York City, well, just look at the map. No self-respecting first grader would ever be a city planner for something like this. And yet, I was there to speak. So I got to the rental car agency and I asked the person, can you give me a map? This person assured me that if I got lost, there is a map above the passenger visor should I need it. I drove out onto the highway and immediately got lost. So I reached above the passenger visor, and you'll never guess what. There was a piece of paper, so I pulled it out and unfolded it. Believe it or not, it was a map. Unfortunately, it was not this map of New York City, it was this map, Chicago. Now, this is a beautiful map. This is a great map. Chicago makes a lot of sense. If you get lost, you take 3 right turns and you're right back where you were before. If you do that here, you'll never be found again. You see, I was not in Chicago where I could use this beautiful map. I was in New York. I needed a map that described the contours of the city in which I found myself. The problem we have today when we try to stand for truth is that our professors and the news media give us something like a Chicago map when we're trying to navigate New York. They give us a wrong perspective, a wrong worldview. Now, in my town, in my little hippie town in Colorado, when somebody has something to say, they put a bumper sticker on their car. Congress, if only they could be so simple about it. The average year in Congress, there are 200 committees and subcommittees that convene to consider 9,500 different bills, 110,000 pages that would go from the floor to the ceiling of this room and 10 feet out onto the roof. And journalists are even worse. Every day, they develop and write 350 billion words. How are we ever going to make sense of all of this? The thing I want you to understand, that if you remember nothing else from this talk, remember this. The world of ideas is like a map. Ideas flow in patterns. Nobody is neutral. Everyone has a worldview. The New York Times is not neutral. The Washington Post is not neutral. Your professor, even your favorite professor, is not neutral. And here's the problem. There are three dominant counterfeit worldviews today that try to intentionally disguise what they really believe to be true about the world. If we can understand that, get below the surface, read the map, then we can make sense of the world of ideas. Here are these three worldviews briefly. Number one, Marxism. Marxists say that the rich are the problem. Everybody knows that. But very few people have ever asked why a Marxist would say such a thing. Here is the underlying reality after having studied this for decades. Marxists believe that only the material world exists. There is no God, there is no Holy Spirit, there's no Jesus, there's nothing. There aren't even such things as ideas. There is no such thing as innovation. There's no such thing as inspiration. Only the material world exists. So if one person has more material wealth than someone else, it's because they stole it. And if they stole it from you, then it's not wrong to steal it back. The Marxist worldview is right out there in front. The Black Lives Matter organization co-founders said to the media, "We are trained Marxists." In fact, they put together a platform, and as I read through it, I compared it and realized about 75% of it comes directly from the Communist Manifesto. And almost no one understands how this is true. And yet, I work with a lot of church people. I work with a lot of Christians. I love this. I don't apologize for it. But I am a little bit embarrassed that 83% of Christian church-attending millennials strongly agree, or agree somewhat, that the root of society's problem is that rich people exploit the system in a way that hurts the working class. In other words, they have bought into a Marxist worldview because they have no idea that it stands completely at odds with everything they believe about God. Does this make sense so far? Second worldview, the counterfeit worldview that dominates in our world today, is secularism. Secularism says that religion is the problem. If we could just get these religious people to shut up and go back to their little homes and not give us any grief, then we could solve all of the world's problems. Well, why would a secularist say this? The secularist never proves that there is no God. The secularist assumes that there is no God and builds an entire perspective on life based on that assumption. To a secularist, with no evidence whatsoever, all God beliefs are considered to be like the tooth fairy. Several years ago, I was speaking at an event, and a lady came up to me and asked me, "Do you believe in God?" "Yes." "Do you believe that God is everywhere present?" I said, "Yes, in fact, I do." She said, "I would never teach that to my child. That's creepy." I said, "Well, I don't understand what's so creepy." And all of a sudden I realized she was talking about God from a secular viewpoint. She doesn't actually believe God exists. God is the fairy tale that she tells to her child at bedtime when the child cannot sleep. To her, the whole idea of God would be creepy if you tell the child that God is everywhere. And I understand, because to her, God is like Santa Claus. And I hate to say this just a few days before Christmas, but Santa Claus is creepy. You know what I'm saying? Santa Claus is a stalker. You've heard the song. He sees you when you're sleeping. He knows when you're awake. If your reaction to Santa Claus growing up was like this, that is totally rational. But the secularist says that's how we should react when we think about God. Secularists are foaming at the mouth at the possibility of a Joe Biden administration. In fact, a group called the Secular Democrats of America recently sent a 28-page letter of policy demands to Joe Biden. And here was their quotation in the document. "Disregard for science and disdain for expertise have reached an all-time high in this administration of magical thinkers and conspiracy theorists. We believe that now is the right time to disentangle government policy from the influence of sectarian religious interests that have become dangerously entrenched at all levels of government." And yet, 63% of Christian church attending millennials strongly agree or agree somewhat that what is morally right and wrong changes over time based on society, which is a core secularist tenet. Let's do one more. Postmodernism. Postmodernism doesn't say that the rich are the problem or that religion is the problem. Postmodernism says that anyone who claims to know the truth of any kind is the problem. That we have no access to reality. All we have are our words to describe it. And you probably have had postmodern professors. Boy, do they love to use words in the most confusing possible way, right? The famous philosopher, German philosopher Martin Heidegger, who was a founder of this movement, said, "In the naming, the things named are called into their thinging. Thinging the unfold world in which things abide, and so are the abiding ones. By thinging, things carry out world." And all the people said, huh? Like, what? I don't understand exactly. And yet, it's a popular viewpoint. 60% of Christian church attending millennials strongly agree or agree somewhat that no one can know for certain what meaning and purpose there is to life. At Summit Ministries, we make no apologies for teaching students a Judeo-Christian worldview, that through God we can know the truth and we can find freedom and prosperity. And I'm not the only one who says this. The atheist philosopher Luke Ferry, author of A Brief History of Thought, said it is to Christianity that Western civilization, quote, owed its entire democratic inheritance. So how do you put this kind of knowledge into practice? I want to give you 5 very simple, straightforward strategies, 5 questions. So let's say you are in class and your professor says something crazy, which happens every 30 seconds, right? Consider this as a strategy. If you don't know exactly what the facts are in the situation, you could just raise your hand and say, "I'm a little puzzled," and then ask a question that defines the terms. What do you mean by that? One time a guy told me, "There is no God." And instead of disputing him, I just asked him, "What do you mean by God?" He said, "You know, the big grandfather figure in the sky who throws lightning bolts down on people he doesn't like." I said, "Zeus?" "No, I don't believe in Zeus either. We have some common ground here." The second thing is to dispute, and you don't even have to make a claim, you can ask a question. A question like, "Do you think that's the whole story?" One of my professors in class one day said, "Students, I'm going to describe to you in one sentence the whole of Judeo-Christian history. God is a mean bully." I just raised my hand and asked, "Do you think that's the whole story?" "Well, what do you mean?" I said, "Well, you summarized 4,000 years of history in one sentence. Do you think that's the whole story?" And he said, "Well, of course, I'm exaggerating for effect." Well, I looked around at my classmates and realized in one instant, they began to see him as the closed-minded bully and me, the Christian, as the open-minded person. It was a complete turnabout. Here's a third question to decipher what is going on. How did you arrive at that conclusion? It's fascinating to me that people will take on a worldview and even march in the streets without having the slightest clue about why they believe what they believe. You can simply ask them about it. Fourth is to plant some doubt. How do you know that what you believe is true? It's always been a little baffling to me, but even people who say there is no such thing as truth believe that to be a true statement. Are you following what I'm saying? So if they say that, you don't have to dispute it. You can just ask, how do you know that what you believe is true? I promise you, even with prominent professors, when I have asked this question, I get fumbling and sometimes 20 or 30 seconds of silence because they have never actually considered that as a possibility. And then the final thing is to give people something to dwell on. What happens if you're wrong? What happens if you're wrong? Let me give you a quick illustration of this. When I was at the University of Denver getting my doctorate in philosophy, I loved when people would set up booths on campus and want to talk to you, right? Because that's really cool. They're inviting a conversation. So one day we had Animal Rights Day. I walked up to one of the tables. "What are you doing?" "We're saving the harp seal pups." So I asked, "Why?" The guy looked at me and in a very snotty way said, "Who are we to say that we are any better than any other creature?" Well, that is an opening big enough to drive a truck through. and I like to drive. I said, well, I have a problem with your worldview. He said, why? What's that? I said, do you bathe? You know, it's an honest question, right, for some of these people. Yes, I bathe. Do you use shampoo? Yes. Do you have any idea what shampoo does to the little dust mites that live on your body and depend on you for their survival? He shuddered and said, no. I said, well, I will tell you. The shampoo goes inside the mouths of those little dust mites, and they swell up and explode and die and wash down the drain dead. He asked me, why are you telling me this? I said, because you just said, who are we to say that we are any better than any other creature? I'm just wondering how you justify being a mass murderer of dust mites. This led to a 15-minute conversation about really important things. I want to give you a little more training. If you are coming to breakout sessions this afternoon, I invite you to two. Number one, I invite you to a workshop that's going to be held at 1 o'clock called Marxism, Socialism, and Social Justice and 5 Simple Ways to Respond. We'll talk about the Marxist worldview. Then at 2 o'clock, a workshop called Jesus and Conservatism about how Christianity is responsible for liberty and justice in this country. I'm Jeff Myers from Summit Ministries and summit.org. Thank you so much for your time.